So back in the spring, I think when Kim was doing all her great planning for this year's Big Bites, she had been instrumental in my attempt to do this the first time. So she reached out and said, would you be willing to share your journey in doing this as a novice? I said, well, yeah, why not? And what I'm doing today is coming to you very transparent, warts and celebrations and glitches across the board. And I do have to give a shout out to Rick Geisel, who was partially along for this journey, because not only did this take place during my 3-year renewal cycle when I had to have somebody come in and observe my class, which we should do all the time anyway, but Rick was on this constant week to week, do we have class, do we not have class, to come in and actually watch in-class content. So shout out to you, thank you Rick, for being flexible with that experience. So my idea behind flipping was really necessity is the mother of invention. I have been known forever as a project person, way back from my K-12 days, and I'm happiest if I have some kind of a project to work on. And whenever I go to a conference, I come back with great ideas that, man, our students could really benefit from this. And one of those was partnering university to local K-12 schools to be able to both enhance our student skills in the school counseling program, but then also provide counseling services, in particular Tier 1 classroom instruction on a lot of those preventative social emotional components that students need in a school that doesn't have an elementary counselor. And so we reached out to, Sean and I reached out to our charter office, to Rob Kimball, and he's like, sure, we'll find the people that we need to connect with. And fortunately, Walker Charter Academy was willing to partner with us. And their principal, Steve, was phenomenal. And so, like, okay, so we're gonna be able to create these school counseling lessons. We're going to be able to have students work in groups, and we're gonna be able to go in and actually teach these lessons. Now, grad students can act like kindergartners sometimes, but it's better if you're really working with the real age. And so the course that we're teaching this in, this is where students learn to create those lessons and then deliver them. So being able to go into a real school, deliver them to real students, was a phenomenal opportunity. And because last year, this is not the case this year, we had a number of students who were full-time students and didn't have full-time jobs, their schedules allowed them the flexibility to go in. So with that opportunity, all of a sudden it comes to my thinking, which rarely slows down. These are grad students. They are really busy people. I want them to create a series, a unit of 3 scaffolded lessons for a grade level. Where are they going to find time in their lives to do that? They've got families, they've got jobs, they've got responsibilities, they're taking other courses. How are they going to do that? And so at that point I was like, okay, how can I do this? I reached out to the team and said, you can flip it. Why? Because then it allowed me to cover some of the basics in the flipped content, but most importantly, rather than answering, and this may sound a little self-serving, rather than answering a whole lot of emails about questions, students could work on these lessons in class. They could be together, point of performance, Judy, what do we do? Also, we had 2 portions of class. One, where the principal from Walker Charter was coming in to present, to be able to give an overview of his school and the needs of his students, and then also another hour in the curriculum materials library, where there's not direct teaching going on. So it seemed like this was the ultimate opportunity to be able to start experimenting with some flipped content. And then also, they needed the information to be able to move forward in this project. So that was kind of what laid the groundwork. It really was, how do I teach content and maximize student time to create high quality school counseling lessons for 1st graders, 3rd graders, 4th graders, and 6th graders. So, like any good instructor, we want to gauge what prior knowledge is in our group. So if you will just play along with me, we have a multiple choice question. The multiple choice question is, what is flipped instruction? Let's gauge what your prior knowledge is. I will read through the possibilities. And if you think it's the correct answer, please stand. A, students teach, instructors scroll through social media. B, testing first, teaching later. C, students engage, you're not standing up yet, I'm not sure what that's about. Students engage in lower level learning before class, allowing for increased student engagement and higher order content processing in class. Or D, wouldn't A be fun? If you've never done this, it's a riot. As you're walking to teach sometime and there's another class in session, just look at the computer screens of the students and contrast what's going up in the front of the classroom with what's on their screens.
Right.
So, now, what were the benefits? Whenever we launch into a new endeavor, we want to make sure we're doing this for a valid reason. First of all, I needed to remove that sitting in class, that sit and get basic level information that could be done in a screencast, it could be done through readings, it could be done through different technology outlets to maximize the student engagement opportunities during class. And if you teach grad classes, you know you've got them once a week for 2 hours and 50 minutes, and every minute is essential. Also, another benefit of this is that in the structure of this particular project, students signed up for their preferred grade levels. So did you want the real littles, like kindergarten through 2nd grade? Were you looking at more of that middle elementary of 3rd through 5th, or 3rd through 5th, or were you looking at more of that middle school age? And so then I was able to group them by the grouping of the age level they wanted to work with. So when we flipped the content, they weren't just in their already conceived cliques that sometimes they have in class. They were working with students they hadn't worked with, but as you see as I go through the technology, they were then connecting with everybody in the class through the use of things like Flipgrid. So it enhanced that entire classroom environment, creating that safety by being able to post videos. And for this particular class, getting to know each other was important because about midterm, we moved from the creation of these lessons into the teaching of our counseling skills. And they start by counseling one another, and so being able to create that environment of emotional safety for one another, that familiarity, it was really front-loading that whole capacity to get to know their classmates. Also, they came to class with a storehouse of information. Now, that was the intent. It didn't always happen that way, but that was the intent. A lot of the information that I would have been doing in a sit and get, of course with student engagement activities intertwined, they were coming to class with, so they were ready to use it right away, which increased that capacity for how do I take this theoretical or this best practice or this evidence practiced information and now put it into a real lesson that I'm going to be teaching to real students. And I'm going to be working with my teaching team to be able to do that. So those were the benefits. Now, if you're considering flipping, I really think the first question you have to ask is why? What is your purpose in doing it? Do you see that this is maybe getting your toe in the water to online courses? Are you looking for ways to engage with your students more actively during your class time? Are you in a class where there is a lot of lab space and time, and you find that you end up cutting some of those very experiential experiences, opportunities short, because you're trying to pack in content? For me, it was the necessity as the mother of invention. I wanted to make sure our graduate students had the time they needed to be able to create these very high quality lessons. Start small. I highly recommend you start small. And with that, create a timetable. Now, this was all happening last fall, and the launch date was last winter. And all of us know that if you're in the midst of one semester, you're in the midst of that semester. And then all of a sudden you have Christmas vacation, which is one of the greatest jokes ever. It's just get ready for the next semester. And so this, I didn't have that timetable. Since then, I've gone through the wonderful online credentialing. I'm teaching, Sean and I are both teaching online now. This has been instrumental in knowing how to do things better and how to do it differently. But if you've got that luxury of time, once you've got your why down, kind of the Simon Sinek start with why, then figure out your timetable. Also start with what to flip. Not every single thing that we teach, we are storehouses of information. Some of it still needs to be presented in that face-to-face concept. We can't flip everything. Some things are very appropriate to that, others are not. So as you're looking through your syllabus and you're considering what the different objectives are, which ones would be easy to flip, and as doing that, what can you then do to enrich the experience around that concept for students? Have some kind of a format. Yes, great.
Do you mind?
Absolutely, go for it.
How did you make that decision?
I will get to that.
Oh, okay.
I will get to that because I've got a couple slides that I don't have to say a word. The pictures will tell the story of how I started with that.
I'm just curious, like what criteria
Yeah.
you used to.
So then have a format, figure out how you're going to go about doing that. And mine was like an hour-long, at least hour-long meeting with Justin and Kim. Hunter, you're not on the slide, but you've always been there for me also, so
That's right.
I've got to include you. Which means you find your team. Do not do this alone, no matter what. I could not have, I went back to my original page of notes from my meeting with Justin and Kim that even got me thinking about how to do this. And it was kind of affirming. I'm like, I did that. Oh, I did that. Oh, I forgot I could have done that. Don't do it alone. You've got some experts here in the College of Education. We've got our wonderful instructional design experts. Dr. Rosemary Cleveland is, I want to grow up to be her. I have told her that I want to grow up to be her. Dr. Barbie Honeycutt is my best friend. If anybody knows her, tell her she's my best friend. She is an expert, and it started with flipped instruction. And she is an instructional designer, but she's now taken this into her own business and has one of my very favorite podcasts. It's called the Lecture Breakers Podcast, where she brings in experts on all things academic teaching. And she's branched out both from the flipped to the online to now how do I engage students in a face-to-face in-seat class as well. And I'm going to be referencing some of her materials a little bit later that helped me to get a little focus to go back to Greg's question. But I highly, highly recommend her, and I have a few other resources that are helpful as well. So make sure you find your friends. You're not alone in this. In fact, I can't say enough about the online and hybrid learning community. It is a phenomenal opportunity to connect. Sometimes it's like therapy. What do we do with all these emails? Can't they just find it on their own occasionally? We need to be able to be connected, especially if we're doing flipped instruction, if we're teaching online, even if we're teaching hybrid, we don't connect with each other. And we need to be each other's people in these endeavors, not just in times of coronavirus, also in times of drinking Coronas. Okay, I said that. So my first attempt, how did this go? Greg, there's the question answered. That's what I felt like. For me, teaching has always been second nature. I was born into a teaching family. I think it was a dominant gene. But with that, we know how much we know, and so how do you convey that to students? And I felt like, literally, the amount of time I spent rabbit trailing, oh, this is a cool idea, this would be cool to do. It was so counterproductive because I knew in my head all the great things that could be flipped, but it was then bringing it down to a level to make it manageable, to not overwhelm students, and also still give me time in my day to function. So the answer came from Barbie Honeycutt. And this is the irony. Sometimes I get so wrapped up in the excitement of teaching, I forget the fundamentals. Here's the irony, and you're welcome to laugh at me. Part of what I teach students to do is to use the American School Counselor Association lesson plan template. Spells it out. You do A, B, C, D, everything is spelled out. Yeah, this was Judy's lesson plan template to start with. Why I never made that intellectual crossover, I don't know. But this is actually a free resource from Barbie Honeycutt. You can go to her website, which is drbarbieHoneycutt.com, I think, and download these free resources. And this is a model on how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but it helps you to put it in a framework of Bloom's taxonomy and be able to take care of some of those lower level blooms using the verbs to kind of wrap your head around, okay, this would be good to be able to flip so that when your students come to class to engage whatever your activities are, they've got that information to move to those higher levels. And so she starts with, okay, so what do I want for my pre-class content? What am I going to flip? What are those objectives? And this is hard to read, I know that, but it's just an example of how it works. And then you move to your learning outcomes for in class. And so I went from Post-it notes all over, or umpteen articles, or all kinds of ideas pinballing in my brain, to some structure. I've now moved from this, for my online teaching, to a blank PowerPoint storyboard. So as I'm starting to conceptualize and move content from the face-to-face forum to the online forum, I take every major topic or concept and just put it on a white slide, and that came from one of Barbie Honeycutt's guest speakers in her podcast, and then I can fill it in. Then I can develop it, and it gives me structure immediately. In fact, that's how I did this presentation at like 8 o'clock one night sitting watching TV. It was like, okay, these are the things I want to make sure I cover. And then I can go in and I can put in the fun graphics and I can add the text and find the videos. But it gave me structure. And make sure you invite Bloom to the party. And you're going to see how that transpired. I'm going to give you 1 week, one set of objectives to demonstrate what that actually looked like for me for flipped content for my students. So, what I would start with, and this was only, I want to say, 4 or 5 weeks of flipped content that was actually engaged in during this semester. Because remember, this part of the class is about till midterm. And we also had guest speaker, and we had curriculum materials library, so it wasn't the full course that was flipped. So for this particular week, notice the verbs. I even got color coding with the Bloom's taxonomy color. Identify, that's a lower level Bloom. So how do we engage students? How do we keep them moving and interactive and connecting with each other as we're teaching these lessons? And helping our students to understand more about learning theory and how to get students to engage in more parts of their brain and so on. Then list accommodations that students can use for students that have special needs. So you're starting to get into some resources, you're doing some of those bottom level learnings that I could stand up here and lecture about, or here's what you need to do, and I'll show you how that transferred into Blackboard and then the activities. And then here, we know create is one of the higher level Blooms, but this was done for a reason. If students were able to create pre and post test questions to measure student gains in knowledge, skills, and attitudes from their lessons, they would then come to their small groups and everybody would have a bank of questions. So if they were going to create one pre-post assessment for their 6th grade lesson, they weren't starting from square one in their small group. Everybody was coming in with some questions that they could then modify or take as is, or take the general concept and maybe change the format. So that's where the objectives were. Sean?
I'm just curious then, when you came back to class, was there some weeks a good question, or was that part of the flipped content?
That was part of the flipped content. One of my, I don't know if you've used it in class, it's the Data's Easy as 1, 2, 3, where it takes mindsets and behaviors and how to make that into a pre-post question.
Okay.
And then because they were working in class, ideally, I would be there to answer the questions. So if they had particular questions, and because they did post this on Flipgrid, And I don't model that particular one here. You'll see the engagement activities and that prompt on Flipgrid. I could then comment on their individual questions through Flipgrid back to them privately on whether or not it was assessing what their learning target was, whether it was worded appropriately, if it was going to get them the data that they needed. So then what did it look like in Blackboard? This was one of my greatest areas to gain knowledge. This didn't go well. I had too much, it wasn't organized well. Taking the online course in May last year really helped me structure my Blackboard in a more cohesive way. But what I'm going to be focusing on here, this is where all the flipped content was. So they just needed to go to the flipped resources for week 4. Everything was linked. But then, when we started to break it down into objectives, the specific items that they needed to focus on were listed. So for that first objective, which is the one that we're going to focus on as the example of how to flip, identify ways to engage students through interactive activities and school counseling core curriculum lessons, which are now just known as instruction. They needed 2 different items. The link to the kinesthetic classroom was in Blackboard, and then there were 2 additional documents, closing activities and discussion protocols, that they needed to engage with as well. So we're just looking at that one objective right now. And then Sean, to answer your question, creating pre-post test, the use of data in school counseling, we use some of Trish Hatch's work with that also. So then, they knew what they needed to do. The video is about 20 minutes, I think. This year I've taken it a step further and put it into Edpuzzle. And I'll talk about that technology a little bit later. And then they were also going to review those 2 different documents. So, here were their directions. Figure out how you can put movement into your lessons. How can you get students up, out of their seats, perhaps moving to 4 corners, maybe doing a human Likert scale, maybe being able to move through stations based upon your lesson. Figure it out so that when you come to class, you've got a bank of ideas. People have already looked at the lessons that you're creating. They've identified our standards, our mindsets and behaviors for student success. And now they're coming to class, not starting at square one. Then, because we used Flipgrid, for extra fun, actually do the videos. Actually do it in the video. Nobody says learning has to be boring. And so if you're going to ask students to do something, and it can be something as simple as a fist to 5, it can be something as simple as thumbs up, thumbs in the middle, thumbs down, figure out some way to demonstrate this. Then, identify one engagement activity to use at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of your lesson. Include the topic of the lesson and how you would include this activity. So those were the things that students were engaging in and creating in their own time, so that when they came to class, they were ready to work, incorporating all these ideas and being able to sift through what would be most appropriate for their grade level and for the topic of their lessons. I love Flipgrid. Now the story behind this picture, I do want to be a pirate, that is not a lie. But within a month, my grandson gave me 2 black eyes. So I just got rid of one and headbutted me again, and I got the second. So I was a pirate for that day. So this was how students engaged. It was also an opportunity for me to assess their engagement with the pre-class material. I could go through and I could document. What I did not do, and I would do again from learning how to teach online better, is there would have been points assigned to this. There would have been what do I call evidence of engagement points, so that I could make sure. But then they connected with each other. They could see one another. So introduce and then model a movement strategy that could be used in your classroom lessons. And I do an example for that. So that's where you miss some of that in the face-to-face, but through Flipgrid, I could model that for students. And I think what I did was just a heads down, thumbs up, whether or not I understood it. It was simple to do in the space that I was. And people were doing all kinds of things. They also did the same for the pre-post. They wrote it on a sheet of paper and they just held it up in front of the screen. There's nothing wrong with old school paper pencil. But then, because, and this is another thing that Kim has really alerted to me to, which is helpful, as students leave our courses and all that great Blackboard content that we upload goes away, these stay as long as there's a flip grid. So as long as they still have that link, they can access all of these as they move forward in their careers. Now the other thing is, what then happened in class? What did we do? Well, one of the things that Sean and I had put together in the fall, no, the prior spring. So this was winter 2019. We started this project actually in winter 2018 with a needs assessment that was given to the faculty at Walker Charter Academy. And so students were able to get into a real live needs assessment created by real live teachers with real life students and be able to break down what the predominant needs were as evidenced by the faculty to be able to really hone their lens in. So rather than just creating, we're going to make some fun little lessons, all right, so this is the issue that our sixth graders are facing. They really don't have a lot of empathy for one another. They have a very difficult time taking perspective and being able to communicate that to one another. So they could absolutely align their lessons to what was needed in the viewpoint of the teachers. This also came from being able to listen to the principal and ask very directed questions. They had already seen the needs assessment. And so when the principal came into class, they were informed about, okay, now we noticed that this was a need, tell us more. You've seen the needs assessment, what else do we need to know? Tell us a little bit more about your school. So it became not just a, here's a guest speaker, listen to them. They had prior knowledge going in that they could then ask more directed questions to help them create more specific, more laser-focused lessons. Obviously, number two, we've already talked about, and then being able to spend that time integrating all these ideas into that face-to-face setting. And what was beneficial, because from this, after they created their 3 scaffolded lessons, each student then had to create 2 individual lessons. One in career development and one in academic development. So it might be college selection, it might be study skills, time management. So by doing these lessons together in a group with guidance from me, students who did not have teaching experience and were coming into this whole lesson planning thing completely unaware could benefit from the experience of teachers before they had to launch into this individually. And at the same time, there's also a learning curve for teachers, because what teachers are used to is, well, if I don't get done with everything 3rd hour today, I've got 3rd hour tomorrow. And in the world of school counseling, getting into classrooms, depending upon the school, especially the grade level, our time really has to be maximized. It oftentimes is a one and done. So if you don't get through your content, you're not going to have a second chance and a lot of opportunities unless you have a great cooperative teacher. So it also allowed me to connect in that very essential, realistic time. They didn't have to wait for me to get to an email and to respond. And even though we all try to do our very best, sometimes email becomes a black hole. And that's the last thing you want when your students are working on a restricted time schedule. Now, the question with flipped instruction is, how do you implement it with fidelity? How do you make sure students are doing what they need to do? And this was a glitch. I told you I was coming with warts and everything. When I did the midterm evaluations for the course, and at the end, one thing that came up was our group was compromised because not everybody did the flipped content. And in my little utopian Pollyanna world, I know my students are just sitting at home waiting for me to launch the next module. And then Then they come to their counseling sessions like last night and they talk about procrastination, how I'm way behind and I'm not getting this done and I'll sit on my couch instead. I realize, okay, Judy, you are not as important as you think you are. Come back to reality. But having some kind of an assessment with a participation grade, it needs to mean something, because yes, we will have those altruistic students who are doing this for the sake of learning and to getting better and to serving students and to gain knowledge in their career, and then we won't. So some of them need that carrot in order to do that. Also assigning the completion points to the technology pieces, even if it's just 2 points. And that's pretty much what I've done now in my my online courses. I have an evidence of engagement that's 2 points. I tried to do too much and got overwhelmed by the grading and the assessing. Now it's typically 2 activities within the module and then a 5-question module review at the end. But then I'm able to gauge what students are learning. And then having some kind of a ticket in the door.
Can you just go back for a second?
Yeah.
Can you just clarify, and I guess I'm not tracking with you, assign completion points to technology components, what does that mean?
So flip grid.
Okay.
Did you complete the flip grid?
Oh, okay.
Did you complete, I think I used,
So you're giving
one
points
Padlet.
for doing the activity
Yep.
that's technology oriented?
Yep,
Okay.
exactly. So
Okay.
both the, kind of the old school, we talk about ticket out the door, to be able to do that formative assessment at the end of class. What did you take away from today? This was a ticket in the door. And so this took the basics, and it was largely off of a school counselor's curricular leaders, a content analysis of ASCA lesson plans, and then taking what they had read and moving it a little bit higher up the Bloom's taxonomy levels to be able to apply it. So, and then being able to take a specific scenario and apply it. So there was some thinking involved. It wasn't just sitting back at home making a fun flip grid. I wanted them to do some thinking so that when they were coming back into class, they had processed in a way that may have been done if it would have been in a face-to-face format. So for instance, this was a long situation where you're trying to get into a classroom and you can't, you need to troubleshoot. Needs analysis says that a significant number of juniors don't have post-secondary plans, so you need to get into these classrooms and give students this great information. They had to start troubleshooting that. How are you going to do that? And they were thinking about this based upon the information that had been provided in the flipped content. Justin?
Did you make up that term ticket in the door? I like that. I've actually never
Yeah,
heard
it's
it before.
It's just a tweak off the ticket out the door.
I love that. That's a really good idea. I was just, if you don't mind, I was going to add something. I think this is like the key to flipped learning in general, because whenever I'm working with faculty to talk to them about flipped learning, I always try to make the argument to them. If you've ever asked students to read and then come to your class, you have done flipped learning. It's just a lot of the times we make the assumption, which is probably right in a lot of cases, that students don't do the reading. Therefore, some faculty will go back and lecture, so you create that cycle. So really, in my opinion, the only difference between flipped learning and what most people see as lecture-based or traditional learning is that we're no longer making that assumption that they're not reading, and we're making them have a ticket in the door. I like that term. I've never heard that before. That's really good. So that's my way to get people into it, because I'm like, you've probably already done this. You've just not enforced it, more or less. So
I think the enforcement piece, I don't
important, yeah.
want to think of us as enforcers, but there are students that are going to need that carrot in order to do that. And even with my online, not this semester, but last semester, because I realize our students are so busy, they oftentimes don't have an opportunity to just sit in front of their computer screen, that so many of them have everything on their phones and their mobile devices. I took sections of the text I wanted them to read, and I read them. And I thought, that's kind of weird, these are grad students. But yet, giving them that opportunity, I don't care how they get the content. I want them to get the content. And I could take those specific parts and then I could build off of it, and it would allow them, wherever, however they were intaking that information, to do it in a way that worked for them. And some of the students will come back and say, we appreciate how you address so many different learning styles, because sometimes just reading something for me, unless I can annotate it, doesn't make sense. But when I could hear you reading it with the emphasis, and I could follow along, it made sense. And especially when those of us in education and school counseling, we want to be really attuned that not every kid sitting in your classroom is going to learn the same way. Well, that doesn't change when you walk across the stage and get your high school diploma. Think about how you all learn now. If you just give me a bunch of words, it's probably not going to go anyplace. I'm going to need something to link it to. And that's just who we are as unique learners. So Kim does have the PDF for this presentation. These are live links, and thank you.
I will send them out.
Yes.
Thank you.
So Barbie Honeycutt, Lecture Breakers podcast, as well as all her other great resources. Faculty Focus is a free resource, which has lots of information. It comes to your email if you subscribe. I have a folder in my email for online and flipped instruction. And so when those emails come in, I just put it into one of my folders. And if I'm looking for things, and if I remember it's there, I can tap in and go, oh yeah, that was a really good idea. Just so that I have some place to keep it. If it's really, really super good, if it's a particular article, I might download it and then put it into the specific course that it connects with the best. I have not gotten this yet. Judith Jutel was one of the speakers featured in the Lecture Breaker podcast. I loved what she had to say in that podcast. I just haven't spent the $99 to get her online learning. And I wondered if there's some way that perhaps we can get a university subscription to it. Because she does a lot with online learning, and I took away several really key pieces of information from her podcast. And then if you don't come to these folks, come. They're amazing. They feature so many skilled instructors, interchange of ideas, connecting on everything from how to use technology, how do you teach in a synchronous online setting, how do you teach asynchronous, how do you engage students through technology, and it's just such a great opportunity. I love tech. I'm not a techie, but I like playing with it, kind of like I play one on TV. So Edpuzzle I just discovered. How many of you have ever used Edpuzzle? So cool. Justin, what do you like? Do you like it, first of all?
What does it do?
Yeah, I mean, so basically,
I'll tell you.
It's something it does, the way I've seen it usually is it adds quizzing videos
Yeah.
while you're using it, yeah. So, Canopta can do some of the same things, and Puzzle's interface is a little nicer looking, for
Yeah.
sure, and there's some better question options.
Yep, so you can upload a video. So I did the kinesthetic classroom this year, and you can put in, like if you want to add to the video, and maybe you want to put in your comments that would link specifically to the course that you're teaching and make that connection for students, you can do that. You can also put in quiz questions, another way to make sure they're engaging with the content. I did learn the hard way this year that you have to upload your whole class. I learned that the hard way. But I just explained to students, you know what, this is new. If we don't try, we don't grow. And so, yes, you did that, you watched the video, you engaged with the questions. Now I know I'll just have to upload the whole class in to be able to use that. Flipgrid I love. MindMeister is a good story. MindMeister is a mind mapping tool. And I had students both face-to-face and online engage in 4 different learning stations. I was using the time to do some connection one-on-one with students as they were working through these. And one of the comments that I'd gotten from the online students is it would be really nice if sometimes we had the material very chunked. And so I chunked it into 4 different learning stations. And the engagement tool that I used was MindMeister, which is a mind mapping tool. And so they were to create their own mind maps and then submit the link to me as evidence that they had engaged in each of the stations. And that way they could select the material that was most relevant to them. They could connect with links from the materials that they wanted to learn more about. A number of this year's students are teachers, and so they were able to take some of this material and right away implement it into their real classrooms with students. Well, the glitch is if you just get the basic account for MindMeister, you can only have 3 mind maps. So students are sending me their links and I can't get them. They want money. And so I'm like, I was meeting with Kim on something else. I was like, yeah, Kim, best laid plans of mice and men. And you had referenced, who is it that,
Melissa Brennan.
yes, is the queen of free stuff. And so I reached out to MindMeister and explained who I was, what I did, that I was working with aspiring school counselors who will be out in counseling across the state of Michigan and who knows where else. And is there any way that they could help me, because our university does not have a subscription, and to subscribe to this higher level is just something that's not, I pleaded, and I got a free account, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
Now the coolest part is now, for this year, this was not part of the flip last year. This year students have created their classroom lessons. A number of them have used this technology, which to me says, I found it significant in my learning. It helped me to organize my thinking. I want to be able to utilize it with students. So they're just going to have to go into schools and ask for money to get the subscription. Collaborate works extremely well for this purpose. We're now doing counseling labs through Blackboard Collaborate. The other part of this class, we were very gifted to get a grant, and so we have school counselors from the Grand Rapids area who meet with 3 to 4 students, either in the face-to-face setting or completely online through Blackboard Collaborate, and they're practicing their counseling skills. So if you think about all the weird things you'd never think would be able to be done online, you can do this. And then Padlet, being able to use Padlet. We're going to use that in, I think, 2 weeks, and it's going to be starting to tap into, okay, so what are your thoughts about parents? All the different family roles that a school counselor will come in with, and I will have the labels, and they're going to have to add the adjectives or the descriptors, and that will be the introduction into the whole concept of school counselors and how we engage with caregivers in the home. Now, I just explained the way it was supposed to go. And then this hit. If you remember, we had an ice storm and class got canceled on Tuesday night about 2 or 3 weeks into the semester at like 4 in the afternoon. And then we had a week of the polar vortex. So my best laid plans of having this great flipped content kind of went awry, except the content wasn't compromised, the engagement was. So at the end of the day, it wasn't worst case. Students just didn't have as much time in the classroom setting from 6 to 9 at night to work with one another, which that was out of everyone's control. And I don't know about anybody else in here, it actually came out in my course evaluations. I'm like, Judy didn't have anything to do with that. But it was just one of those unintended consequences. But what did I learn? I think whenever we engage in these new endeavors, if we don't go in with an air of curiosity and how we can grow, I think we're really setting ourselves up to fail. So Williamsism 101, our students have threatened to buy Sean and I t-shirts on the back with all our favorite expressions, and mine are all going to be Williamsisms. It's if I don't know, I can't grow. And I tell students that, and I encourage that mindset. So as I'm engaging in these new teaching techniques, you're engaging in creating lessons for students, engaging in developing your counseling skills. If you're not messing up, you're not doing it. This is the place to do it. Because we can pick you up, you can learn from what you've done. And this was an enormous learning experience for me. The structure of your Blackboard site is key. Mine has become so better organized as a result of this. And I also have learned that you don't tell students once where things are located. You tell them about 5 times where it's located and leave nothing to the imagination. And then they will come back and ask where it is. At that point, you take the screenshot of every place it's located and send it in an email. Not that that's passive aggressive. not everything you intend to do gets done. Just accept that. There's still gonna be pieces that get missed. That's where you go back to your objective, and maybe the objective was not met as finely tuned as you wanted it to be. One of the greatest tips, I think, was Dr. Cleveland. Open up a place on your blackboard that nobody sees but you. And everything that goes right and everything that goes wrong, right then, you put it in. You don't open it up to students because they would be more than happy to probably contribute. But I'm already doing that. And what I'm, best intentions again, what I hope to do is as soon as we're done and those grades are in, I want to go back into this class, rewrite my syllabus, rewrite my schedule while it's still fresh. Because now we're using our entire class time in these counseling learning labs, so everything has become flipped. Keep an eye on the clock. The amount of time that this can take is crazy. Now, because I'm a little obsessive and tend to be a perfectionist, it was taking me to do one online module 2.5 full work days. It gets easier. But accept that when you start this, it's going to take time, but then also consider how much time it's going to take your students. I haven't nailed that one down yet. That's when I ask students, how much time are you spending on these particular modules or the flipped content? And that's also hard to gauge because you will have students who spend 1 to 2 hours, and then you'll have those that spend over 4 hours. And that has to do with the depth of processing that they do. Any technology you're going to use has to be taught. So if you want to experiment with technology, learn it yourself. A great between semester project is create a video, a Panopto video, anything, even if it's a handout, and some of them may already be available through our instructional design folks, on how to use the technology. When I did the online course in May, I did a step-by-step with screenshots how to access Flipgrid. And now I have that, so I can just give that to students. Because one of the great awakenings for me is that even though we're teaching digital natives, they are consumers of technology, they're not producers. And especially as we look at broadening who our students are, people are going to come in with very different levels of expertise. Blackboard is going to blow them away. Google may blow some of them away. Google Docs may blow some of them away. So be prepared to do a lot of teaching there. And bottom line, when all else fails, reach out and ask for help. I tell these folks that all the time. When I was in K-12, if we went to our tech people, it was like we were asking for their firstborn. And we were treated like we were ignorant. Like we were putting them out when we wanted to access this stuff. And if you had a glimmer of hope of being technologically savvy, then you got some attention. This is what they do. And it's like when we go to them for help, I feel like we make them happy. And I appreciate it beyond belief. Even if you fall on your face, you're still moving forward. Go back to the beginning. Make it easy. Start small. Don't try to shift the whole course. Find a week. And you're going to mess up. You're going to fall off the surfboard. And it's okay. You explain to students. Usually they'll give you more grace than you expect. Why? Because you're trying to enhance their learning. And if you can help them to understand that, and that falling on your face is part of the learning process, that's huge. And then this is the Barbie Honeycutt, the free templates. And so any other questions? Greg, did I answer your question?
Yeah, looks like you used Bloom to try to bring in the lower level stuff and then try to do the higher level stuff.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Yep, and that's still pretty much what I do. Any other questions?
It's been awesome.
All right, thank you everybody for the opportunity.